Hi BookTube, it's Amy. I'm here for a belated Friday Reads. It's technically early Saturday morning by now, but I thought I would check in here and let you know what I've been reading and what I intend to read in the coming week. So first of all, I want to talk about a book that I should have talked about last week because I'd started it then, but somehow I forgot about it when I sat down to film my Friday Reads, and that is Where the Crawdad Sing. Now this is a book that I'd heard very good things about, and I had also heard bad things about. So I picked it up on audiobook with mixed feelings about what I was getting into, and I have to say it's a bit of a slow burn, but overall I've enjoyed it. It is about Kaya, who is 6 when the novel opens, and her mother has just left and abandoned the family, and one by one her brothers and sisters leave and abandon the family until she is left alone with her abusive alcoholic father, who disappears for days in this swampy region of the United States. And it's interesting to read about the setting because I'm not familiar with swamps, and it's odd to read about, this swampy, almost inland space with salt water and with mussels and saltwater fish. It's just, a setting I've never seen, and I'm trying to imagine it. And it's odd to me that anyone would choose to live in a swamp where everything is mucky and you can basically only get around by boat. So Kaya is 6 when the novel opens, and she grows up over the course of it. It begins in the 1950s and goes into the 1960s. And she is kind of a social outcast. She's a recluse. She essentially raises herself in this swamp in the absence of proper parental figures and in the absence of friends for most of her life. I guess she is what you would call white trash in her society. She is despised by the town people. She avoids going into town when possible, and she hides, in the swampland from anyone that tries to find her. But she is remarkably intelligent, and she is discovering and learning, and it's essentially a coming-of-age story. At the same time, we have this other parallel plot that's happening a few years later when she is grown up in her early 20s, where a young man has been found dead at the bottom of this fire tower in the swamp, and it's hinted that he is linked to her in some way. And so those stories are converging, and I assume we'll eventually find out how this young man died and what her relationship to him was, and whether she was in any way involved in his death. I don't think she's going to be responsible for his death, because that just doesn't seem like the way this novel is going. It's very much a conventional coming-of-age story, right down to the oh my god, I got my first period, what a discombobulating experience, what am I going to do, I don't know what's happening. And to be honest, I've read that scenario so many times that unless you're doing something new with your character getting their first period, I don't know what it's doing in the book, because it's just, it's a cliche. So we've got that scene, then we've got the typical first sexual experience, first boyfriend. So it's very much a conventional coming-of-age story. It just happens to be set in a swamp. But overall, I'm enjoying it. It's a bit of a slow burn, as I said. I'm not sure what my final thoughts will be. I guess I'll let you know when I finish the novel. So I read that. And then I also picked up a novel that I ended up actually DNFing because it turned out to be a creepy novel. I thought I was going to get either a heartwarming or a heart-wrenching story. It's set in Nova Scotia, and it's Watching You Without Me by Lynn Coady. And it's the winner of the Scotiabank Giller Prize, and I'm actually not sure how it came to win that prize because I didn't think it was very good. And I only got about 80 pages in before I threw in the towel and said, I'm not reading this. So it's about a woman by the name of Karen who finds herself responsible for looking after her mentally disabled sister after the death of their mother. And so she goes back to Nova Scotia, to the family home, and has to not only look after the affairs of her mother's funeral and her mother's will and estate and that sort of thing, but she also needs to place her sister in the group home in the care facility that her mother had picked out for her. Seems like a fairly straightforward story. I thought we were going to see her perhaps struggle with the death of her mother, come to terms with what it means to care for her sister, the complications of placing someone you love in a care facility, but instead it mainly seemed to be a story about the creepy home care worker Trevor who shows up and insinuates his way into her life. There's weird stuff like her mother had gotten a cable package and a widescreen TV for him, and he has his own key and he shows up on Sunday. And he is, telling her or insinuating what she should do, kind of taking control of her life. And that would have been fine as a little bit of a subplot, but it seemed to me that the bulk of the novel was about this creepy guy named Trevor. And I wasn't in the mood for that sort of story, and that's not what I thought I was getting myself in for. So I did DNF Watching You Without Me. One novel I did finish, though, is Stephen King's new novel, The Institute. And I have to admit, it gave me an odd feeling. I had this strange moment about 50 pages in where I said to myself, am I even reading a Stephen King novel? It reminded me of a Stephen King novel, but I felt like the Stephen King voice was just missing here. And so I have to wonder if perhaps there was an aggressive editor involved, or if perhaps he is slipping a bit as he ages, or if for some reason there was an additional ghostwriter who collaborated with him, but it just didn't feel like Stephen King narrating. As well, the bare bones of the plot, I thought it was better when Stranger Things did it. So the basic premise of the book is that there is this 12-year-old boy, and he is not only incredibly smart, but he has telekinetic abilities. And he is kidnapped from his bedroom in the middle of the night and taken to this institute where he meets other kids who have telekinetic ability, and also some who have telepathic abilities, and they are undergoing testing of sorts, and these institute officials, who we assume would be government officials, are really trying to push these kids to their limits and train them and figure out what they can do and essentially take control of their abilities for their own purposes. Unfortunately, our main character, this 12-year-old boy, wasn't really all that interesting. And so it was a little bit of a dud in that sense. And there were certain moments in the plot where things lined up just a little bit too coincidentally, dominoes in a row, and you could see the dominoes in a row, which is really not something you want in a psychological thriller like this novel. But in addition to that, the kid with the special abilities who has been kidnapped by a government facility and must escape, we also had the small town police officer who aids him after he escapes and who goes back to take down the institute and aid anyone else who is trapped. Sounds a bit familiar, and as I said, this basic bare bones premise was done a lot better by Stranger Things. It wasn't a horrible novel, but I just wasn't invested, and I didn't find it all that interesting. And there were some things that were just too coincidental, like the one woman who helps our main character, the little boy, to escape. Things just lined up a little bit too well, and it was like she was there not as an interesting character in and of herself, but as a plot device, as an escape mechanism. And the small town cop wasn't that interesting either. He was a little bit two-dimensional, and he was essentially just there to be the cop, to notice something weird, and to help out the boy once he escaped. Overall, I wasn't impressed, and I will be selling this to the local used bookstore to hopefully get some store credit. So I read that yesterday, wasn't too impressed, but I was impressed with the other book I read yesterday, which is Love and Courage, the memoir by Jagmeet Singh, who is the federal leader of the New Democratic, the NDP party, here in Canada, and I picked it up because we have an election coming up. I thought I would pick up Jagmeet Singh's memoir and find out a little bit more about him, and I was surprised because unlike a lot of memoirs of political leaders, this is not strictly a political memoir. It's more of a memoir of growing up. He was born in Toronto, but grew up for a few years on the East Coast after his father was recertified as a doctor here in Canada, and then moved to Burlington, Ontario, where he spent the bulk of his life, ended up going to law school in Toronto, and then running as first a MPP, so a provincial member of parliament in Ontario, eventually as an MP, and then as the leader for the New Democratic Party, which he got, and eventually got himself a seat in the House of Commons. I admit, when he was first elected as the leader of the NDP, I was a little bit wary. I do have a bit of a problem with someone being able to become leader of a party without having a seat in the House of Commons. It just rubs me the wrong way. It especially rubs me the wrong way when that person not only doesn't have a seat, but they have never had a seat. To me, a party leader should be someone with at least a little bit of experience, if not vast experience, in the House of Commons. They should know how things function. They should be a veteran of that world, not someone who doesn't have a seat at all, because there is the chance, of course, that even though they become party leader, they don't end up being elected. They don't get a seat, and then, of course, their party is up a creek and have to select a new party leader. So at first, he did rub me the wrong way for that reason, but I have warmed up to him a bit, just in the way that he has approached the challenges of the campaign. And I don't like to say that I'm swayed by memoirs, but I was quite touched and quite impressed with this memoir, and it's something I definitely recommend if you want to learn a little bit more about him as a person, or just if you're looking for kind of a heartwarming story about overcoming challenges, not only being a visible minority, but dealing with an alcoholic father growing up. And I did quite enjoy this one, and it did touch me, but once again, I'm not really sure where my vote is going to go. I've got a difficult decision to make in the next couple of weeks, and I'll have to decide which local candidate I'm going to be voting for. We'll see. I'll see, how the English language debate goes in the next few weeks, and I might try to watch the French language one as well. We'll see how much I understand there, but enough about politics. So that is what I've read. I've still been working on La Reginata that I talked about last week. I won't talk any more about that. That is one I'm slowly chipping away at. And there is one book that I picked up that I would like to read. My voice is incredibly strained and I feel as though I'm losing it, so I'm going to wrap up pretty quickly here. But I picked up this book when I was at Chapters, picking up the new Stephen King and Jagmeet Singh's memoir, and it's The Secrets We Kept by Lara Prescott. And it just caught my eye because it is a Cold War spy novel, and it's about a group of typists who are called to go undercover and take on some spy work. And so it appealed to me, it appealed to me in that sense. And I don't know much more about it other than that the cover and that beautiful green dress did appeal to me as well. That's what initially made me take a look at the inside, and I thought I could use, something light and fun and something that's exciting and empowering, and also an historical novel. I am really losing my voice here, so I think I'm going to call it a night. Let me know what you're reading this coming weekend and this coming week. Have a lovely evening.